has been probably 36 hours since I offered an update. Jurisdictional conference is not necessarily as packed as general conference, and yet at the same time, it's very packed. So I want to share with you some of what happened today, and since I last updated you. So we started with worship this morning, and Bishop Alfred Johnson offered a wonderful message. And there are lots of great points I really liked and actually got referred to as we were closing the session tonight at the end of his sermon. And I very much appreciate this because I often struggle the most with how to end a sermon. Like, how do you land it? And he just kind of was clearly coming to the end. And then he stopped and said, "That's it." I love it. I just want to end every sermon now with "that's it." And so that was actually how we ended our session this evening. So in the work that we've done in the past day or so, we have received and approved the jurisdictional budget, which includes the mission shares, apportionments. All of these items can be found on the Northeastern Jurisdictional website. And you can also find on the Northeastern Jurisdictional website the DCAs, or the Daily Christian Advocates. So that's going to include each day detailed articles about what happened, as well as material that delegates need to do their work. So if you're really interested in any of these pieces, please check out the DCAs for all of that information. Examples of things that were in our DCA today, and which I'll refer to as I'm giving updates, were a request for a ruling of law from the presiding bishop that the Committee on Episcopacy brought forward, or every member of the Committee on Episcopacy, as well as a request for a declaratory decision. Now, this was shared with the body to become aware, but hasn't officially been asked for, right? So the ruling of law would go to the bishop that's presiding at the time, and the declaratory decision would be sent to the Judicial Council. There's some confusion and question about how that needs to happen. That's actually how we ended our session this evening, because many people expected, it had seemed as though the expectation was that the jurisdictional conference needed to vote on the declaratory decision. Although some folks have questions about that, about whether that needs to happen. But at any rate, that's what folks expected to happen this evening in our evening session. The problem was none of the members of the Committee on Episcopacy were present. That's one problem, because they're working right now. So right now, they're meeting to discern the assignment of bishops to our 6 episcopal areas. So the jurisdictional conference has approved our 6 episcopal areas. And I shared those in a text post earlier, and I'll share those with you now, but keep in mind that what the Committee on Episcopacy decided to do was to follow what's called the glide path to 5 episcopal areas. So we get to have 6 this year because of the action of the General Conference. And so West Virginia and Western Pennsylvania, that in what would be anticipated as 5 episcopal areas would share, will each have their own bishop. But it's expected generally, unofficially, by delegates, that Bishop Deborah Wallace Pageant, who really sacrificially has offered herself and been accepted by both the Northeast Jurisdiction and the Southeast Jurisdiction Committee on Episcopacy, that she would serve across jurisdictional lines. So, and she serves the Holston Conference, and they've already announced their Episcopal assignment. So she's going to continue to serve the Holston Conference. It's expected that she'd serve West Virginia. So Western PA would have a bishop, and then all of the other conferences would share a bishop. Some of those are already linked. Baltimore Washington Conference continuing to share with Peninsula Delaware. Okay, so that's our 3rd. Greater New Jersey continuing to share with Eastern Pennsylvania. That's the 4th. They also already share. In fact, both of those pairs happened when the Philadelphia Episcopal area had to have coverage. So Bishop Easterling has been appointed to the Washington area, which is just the Baltimore Washington Conference, until we are realigning out this jurisdictional conference. But she's provided coverage for half of the Philadelphia Episcopal area, which is the Peninsula Delaware Conference, right? Because Bishop Peggy Johnson had served that Episcopal area before she retired, which was Eastern Pennsylvania and the Peninsula Delaware. So when she retired, they split those and gave Eastern Pennsylvania to Bishop Shoal with Greater New Jersey. Okay, so those pairings, Greater New Jersey and Eastern PA, Baltimore, Washington, Penndale, those are continuing. And then there are 2 new pairings to create 2 new joint Episcopal areas. That would be Upper New York and Susquehanna, and New England and New York. So those are 6 Episcopal areas. And so the Committee on Episcopacy is working through. I promise you, I can think through multiple very reasonable scenarios for a whole host of how that work may happen, but we're all just observers. And so just like during appointment season, people try to figure out the system, but there's tons of information that we don't know. And so that's what the Committee on Episcopacy is doing. The request for a ruling of law and declaratory decision had to do with questions, uncertainties, concerns, anxiety, and as I've shared before, what some have said is a constitutional crisis coming from the decisions of the General Conference, informed by the Interjurisdictional Episcopacy Committee, and then subsequent things that happened and recommendations that happened, including whether the sharing of a bishop across jurisdictional conference lines meets what General Conference said needed to happen, and who has the authority to say that. So there were just lots of questions around that. And the Committee on Episcopacy, in some ways, I think really helped the body by short-circuiting a lot of anxiety around, kind of said, they listened to what folks were hearing. So let's put this all into a ruling of law and a request for a declaratory decision to the Judicial Council. I think that has helped the body because it has really taken off of us a lot of what other folks, a lot of things that other people were saying they were going to ask for declaratory rulings on. But there are still probably a couple of pieces, and we heard from one delegate tonight, a couple of pieces that folks feel like weren't addressed in what are really quite lengthy requests for a ruling of law. Again, that goes to whatever bishop is seated, and then the request for a declaratory decision. I've read a lot of Judicial Council decisions, and it's got to be one of the longest I've ever seen. It's got like 13 points. And so it's very detailed. You can find that by going to today's DCA, the July 11th DCA, if you go to the Northeast Jurisdictional Conference website. All of that, there's just lots. There's lots. As I shared in an earlier video, it's not like an onion. It's like a dodgeball game, or somebody commented, it's like a dodgeball game of onions, right? Layers and things being thrown in. Is that all of this is hypothetical until we actually know and have the assignments, right? And so one of the ways to get the Judicial Council to just not even rule on what you send them is to send them a hypothetical. And it still happens. People still accidentally send hypotheticals, I guess. But because the assignments haven't been made, I think the body, we would have liked in a perfect world to have handled this evening. But as was shared from the chair, when an additional request for declaratory decision was asked around all of this, like none of this has happened yet. But here's the problem. Tomorrow, when the Committee on Episcopacy in the morning announces who the bishops are going to be for each of these Episcopal areas, they're going to announce those. And generally what happens is they announce those and we immediately go, so those conferences, to meet with those bishops, like, yay, we're happy to have you. It's great. But we're not going to be able to do that right away because the announcement's going to be made. And then we're going to have to deal with the declaratory decision and ruling of law on something that now has actually happened. And that doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good. It also doesn't feel good, I think, to some, and folks have concerns, and we want to be transparent. That's been a lot of what we've done as a jurisdictional conference. But I know that we have such gratitude for Bishop Deborah Wallace-Padgett and her willingness to serve with us in the Northeastern jurisdiction. We're excited to have her. And there's a part of it that just doesn't feel good, right? For this to be the vibe she's coming into. It's hard. It has nothing to do with her personally, but that's not great. That's not how you want to offer hospitality to somebody. So these are important questions. It's unfortunate that there's all of this complexity and challenges. So But we certainly are very grateful for her and her willingness to serve with us. So that's what's going to need to happen tomorrow. And that's why we weren't able to fully process it today. We also had a request for an aspirational piece. We'd love to do that, aspirational legislation, because the great thing is about aspirational legislation is, in theory, it can't be ruled out of order because we're just saying folks should do this. But a piece that has come up before about youth being part of delegations. And there were questions that really, several motions or requests that were ruled out of order or clarify that they were aspirational because the jurisdictional conference can't change the rules about who can be elected or even constrain how annual conferences do that. I'm not even sure that an annual conference can constrain and say, we reserve these seats for youth, but certainly can say we want to have diversity of age as part of the diversity that annual conferences nominate into, and that folks are mindful of when they're voting for folks for delegation. There have been a couple other pieces that have been ruled out of order throughout our work together. Some petitions really before they even came to the floor. Again, one dealing with another issue of whether persons who were on the transitional team for the Global Methodist Church could serve as delegates. And really, we can't put any additional rules on what the Book of Discipline says about delegates. And so that's part of the things that get ruled out of order are when we try to do something that the Book of Discipline doesn't give us the authority to do, or we try to impose onto the Book of Discipline more constraint that we don't have authority to do. And so those were some of the pieces that we saw, the reasons things that were getting ruled out of order. So there were several pieces. It wasn't like a landslide of them. And we did receive an updated nominations report after concerns yesterday about diversity and really just information not being correct. And so they corrected information. There had been some adjustments to committee membership that was approved by the body. We, in our work over the past 2 days, have elected some new officers. We give thanks for David Simpson and his work as our jurisdictional conference treasurer for many years, and celebrated his leadership. His wife Sylvia, who has been serving as our registrar, and just give thanks for their leadership in our jurisdiction as well. So those were some of the things that we did. Again, we have probably a few more pieces tomorrow than we thought we were going to. So tomorrow morning, we are going to, the other thing we did today was those Episcopal areas, those 6 Episcopal areas, we met to discuss for, I don't actually know what West Virginia and Western PA did because they were just their delegation. So I'm not sure if they met, but Baltimore Washington Conference and Peninsula Delaware, we met. Part of it was, what are your visions? What are your hopes? Our conferences have worked together. There's certainly people in the delegation who didn't know folks. We shared, particular people, some of the things we are doing in joint ministry. I'm sure for New England and New York and Susquehanna and Upper New York, there was a lot more get to know you pieces. Like us, Greater New Jersey and EPA, again, already have some of those connections. But the other thing that all of these were tasked with doing is to come up with recommendations for the names of the Episcopal areas. So Episcopal areas traditionally, at least in this area, but I think traditionally have been based on a major or the major city in the geographical area that the bishop covers. So the Baltimore Washington Conference, we are one currently, right? Not after this jurisdictional conference, but we are one Episcopal area, the conference. And so some Episcopal areas are one conference. Technically, we are the Washington Episcopal area. And as I mentioned earlier, Bishop Easterling has been providing, so she's assigned to the Washington Episcopal area, and she has been providing coverage to half of the Philadelphia Episcopal area, which is Peninsula Delaware. Bishop Scholl is assigned to, I'm actually not sure what the Episcopal area is called. So part of the thing is many people don't use the names, right? Most folks in local churches don't really use the names of Episcopal areas. You could go your whole life as a United Methodist and never know the name of your Episcopal area. But it is helpful to have a name. And so it's ultimately the Committee on the Episcopacy that decides what the names of Episcopal areas are. But they asked those groups to come up with recommendations for names. We had some discussion on the floor about some of those, like generally those names, and how those were to be chosen. But ultimately, it's the Committee on Episcopacy. So we came up with some ideas. We tossed them around. How do you come up with, names that are going to cover, 2 conferences that are going to work well-ish for folks? So we had some suggestions, but ultimately, it's going to be the Committee on Episcopacy. They'll offer to the jurisdictional conference tomorrow their recommendations of names. We'll need to vote on those. They'll announce the bishops to be assigned. We technically have to vote on those. And all of this, and anything else that just decides to pop up, has to be concluded probably by 10:30, 10:45 when we have a hard stop, because then we'll move. We've got to stop, finish our time. We have a closing worship service a couple blocks away at a local Episcopal, I think they said Trinity Episcopal Cathedral. We have our closing worship at 11:15. So that's the work that we've been doing. And we look forward to hearing who the bishops are what bishops will be assigned to what areas. I really, really, really invite you. Please, 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 please join us in prayer for the Committee on Episcopacy. Join us in prayer for the bishops and their families as they're waiting. The way that it works, I guess, from here on out, from here, till 8:45, hopefully sooner rather than later, the bishops, my understanding is a bishop will get a call from the heads of delegation. The heads of delegations, one clergy, one lay, or the members of the Committee on Episcopacy in the Baltimore Washington Conference. That's it's our tradition that the first elected clergy and first elected laity are our heads of delegation, and that our heads of delegation are the persons that serve on the Committee on Episcopacy. It's not necessarily the case in every conference. That's how it is for us. But the members of the Committee on Episcopacy call the bishop to let them know where they've been assigned. So presumably in those Episcopal areas with shared bishops, I guess maybe it's 4 people, and I don't know if they sit around. I don't know if they designate one person, they sit around a phone. But anyway, they call the bishop that's been assigned to them, welcome them. The bishop will find out. And then again, of course, everybody who knows will hold it confidential till it's announced. So thank you for your prayers, for the work that we